The seventh New Zealand election took place from the 28th of August to the 15th of September 1879. This was the first election where two candidates could run against each other to become Prime Minister. There was actually a choice. The New Zealand government was still the New Zealand government and keeping up the streak of voting out Prime Ministers if they weren't popular enough to maintain power over them. So once Vogel was re-elected in the previous election, 200 days later, he was voted off the top job and was replaced by Henry Atkinson, MP for Egmont, becoming the 10th Prime Minister of New Zealand. You would think that they would finally stick with Atkinson up to the next election, right? Wrong. 400 days later, he too was voted to step down as Prime Minister and was replaced by former Governor-General and MP for Thames, George Grey, becoming the 10th Prime Minister of New Zealand. The Independent Party was splitting between the Conservatives and Liberals under Grey, which made it so this was the first election where there were political parties, and they weren't official parties, but more rebellions against each other. They were also created because there would be disagreements in each party, and having just one independent party would make them more unstable. Sitting Prime Minister George Grey stood for the Greyite Independent Party, which was more liberal and left-leaning party at the time, and challenger John Hall, MP for Selwyn, stood for the Conservative Independent Party, who led the more right-wing part of Parliament. Both candidates had a good chance of winning this election up until around a month before this election, where people in George Grey's government tried to vote him out in the vote of no confidence, which simply means that they thought he was doing a bad job as leader, and the majority didn't support his leadership. It also didn't help Grey that John Hall openly stated that he supported women's rights to vote, which made him even more popular. Nevertheless, the election was very tight once all the electorates finished counting the votes. And here are the results. John Hall won, becoming the 12th Prime Minister of New Zealand, and the first Prime Minister to be elected Prime Minister without being Prime Minister before. He received 45 seats in Parliament. George Grey barely lost this election, receiving 41 seats in Parliament. There were still 88 seats in the New Zealand government, in the New Zealand House of Representatives, so the remaining 2 seats supported neither Hall or Grey's government and just became independent MPs. This was the last election where each electorate was held on different days. While the Maori and European electorates remained on different days, the days each electorate casted their votes in these two elections would be on one day. Thank you.